Alec Murdaugh was indicted by the federal government May 23rd, 2023. Most of those charges carry 30 years. A few of them carry 20, but most of them carry 30. And then there would be an enhancement for the amount of money stolen. Let's go through the plea deal that he took on these 22 federal charges. This is separate from all of the state charges he pled to. In the state charges that he pled to, he got 21, 22 years on those. And then he's got the multiple life sentences on the murder charges. So he pled to the federal charges before he pled to all the state charges. Government's motion to hold defendant in breach of plea agreement. This was just filed with the court on March 26th. When he pleaded guilty, the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, agreed to be fully truthful and forthright with the government by providing full, complete, and truthful information about all criminal activities about which he has knowledge and submit to a polygraph examination at the government's election. In exchange, the government agreed to recommend Murdaugh's federal sentence be served concurrently with any state-imposed sentence for the same conduct. That's the 27 years he got on all the financial crimes. Alec has failed to cooperate as required under the plea agreement and has failed a polygraph examination administered at the government's request. That's sealed, by the way, which is unfortunate. Murdaugh has thereby deprived the government of the benefit of its bargain. The government requests the court find Murdaugh breach the plea agreement and relieve the government of its obligations. Footnote 1. On March 18th, in an effort to comply with Local Rule 12.02, Government Counsel notified Murdaugh's counsel that we intend to file this motion. Yeah. So, remember that plea agreement we talked about? No, that's going to be a no-go, good buddy. We're still going to sentence him on April 1st, which coincidentally is like Monday. So I think, unless they moved the date, I think he's being sentenced on April Fool's Day, which is just too rich for me to even deal with. I am so delighted by the fact that his plea agreement is getting yoinked and he's going to be sentenced on April Fool's Day. But we're going to go take a look at the docket after this because I checked it last night. Things could have changed between then and this morning. Background: on May 23rd, the feds charged Murdaugh via grand jury with a 22-count indictment with conspiracy to commit wire and bank fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. 22-count indictment. Those are the counts. We went over it. Murdaugh pled guilty to the counts pursuant to the plea agreement. Footnote 2. Prior to the plea agreement, the parties signed a proffer agreement under which Murdaugh agreed to be fully truthful and to submit to polygraph examinations. In exchange, the government agreed not to use his own statements against him. The plea agreement contains a merger provision, however, under which the parties agreed that the plea agreement contains the entire agreement of the parties. That's going to come up more, I would imagine. Under the terms of the plea agreement, Murdaugh agreed to plead guilty to all charges, to fully cooperate, to waive his rights to contest his conviction and sentence in an appeal or post-conviction action. Footnote 3. The waiver included the standard limitations for claims of ineffective assistance of counsel, prosecutorial misconduct, future changes in the law that may affect his sentence, and not to contest a forfeiture of money judgment of a minimum of $9 million. In exchange for the concessions provided, Murdaugh cooperated and complied with the conditions. The government agreed to recommend the court impose a sentence served concurrent to any state-imposed sentence for the same conduct, the financial crimes. Murdaugh's obligations to cooperate fully were detailed in the standard cooperation language, requiring him to be fully truthful and forthright. We just went over that. The plea agreement provided that Murdaugh's failure to be fully truthful and forthright at any stage will, at the sole election of the government, cause the government to withdraw its agreement and the agreement to become void. Similarly, the agreement stated that Murdaugh's refusal to take or failure to pass a polygraph to the government's satisfaction will result at the government's sole discretion and the government's obligation becoming null and void. And if the government's obligations became null and void due to Murdaugh's lack of truthfulness, the government notified Murdaugh that it will argue for maximum sentence for the offenses which he has pled in addition to other available remedies, and Murdaugh will not have the right to withdraw his guilty plea. You pled, you deal with it. And what you're going to deal with is the Fed saying, sentence him to all. Green asked in the chat, but aren't polygraphs unreliable? Polygraphs are not used in court to prove that someone did or didn't do a thing, but the Feds do use them in circumstances like this. And Murdaugh agreed to it. So he's allowed to make this plea agreement. They can't use it in court for other things, but they can use it to withdraw his plea agreement here. Should he have agreed to this? No. Why would you sign this? Why would anyone sign this? This is awful. This plea agreement literally gets him nothing. It benefits him none. I don't know why he would have signed this. Cleopatra said, can you refuse to take a polygraph? In this plea agreement, Murdaugh could not have refused to take a polygraph because Murdaugh agreed that refusal to take it would yeet his plea agreement. So no, he couldn't refuse. In other circumstances, the answer is vastly different, but different circumstances are different circumstances. So I can't give you a broader answer to that. You know, if you're going to talk to somebody that wants to polygraph you and you're not like on a reality TV show, talk to a lawyer. Pursuant to the terms of the plea agreement, Murdaugh was interviewed by the United States Attorney's Office and the FBI on 4 separate occasions: May 4th, June 7th, August 18th, and October 18th, 2023. See all the sealed exhibits. Gosh, I wish they weren't sealed. Footnote 4. A SLED task force officer embedded with the FBI was also present during the interviews on August 18th and October 18th. Of course, SLED was there. The government notified Murdaugh that it will argue for maximum sentences for the offenses, in addition to other additional remedies pursuant to the plea agreement. He was interviewed, there we go, on those 4 dates. Against the backdrop of Murdaugh's admitted confession of financial crimes in South Carolina spanning decades and the convictions of co-conspirators who facilitated and benefited from Murdaugh's crimes, the government has a duty to pursue all available avenues to investigate and prosecute others who may be responsible for violation of federal laws. And with more than $6 million in proceeds remaining unaccounted for, the government is compelled to make every effort to identify the location of any ill-gotten gains to make Murdaugh's victims whole. Although Murdaugh accepted responsibility for the charged criminal conduct and admitted his involvement with co-conspirators Russell Laffitte and Corey Fleming, the government believed Murdaugh had not been fully truthful as required under the plea agreement, despite numerous interview sessions during which the government gave Murdaugh every opportunity to be fully truthful and forthright. The last interview must have been like, we're going to do this one last time because we don't believe that you're telling us the truth. And I imagine Murdaugh's interview with the feds looked exactly like his testimony during his trial. Don't you? Just word salading around the answers. I think Murdaugh thought that he could talk his way out of all of this. Sir, the feds are used to people trying to talk their way out of things. It's one thing they're really good at. The government decided to polygraph Murdaugh on the issues related to hidden assets and involvement of another attorney in Murdaugh's criminal conduct. This is why I think it's all sealed. That's why I think it's all sealed. I think there's somebody else that they're targeting. On October 18th, the FBI polygraph examiner administered a polygraph examination to Murdaugh in 2 separate series on the topics of interest. See Exhibit 1, sealed. The examiner determined that there was deception indicated in both series, meaning that Murdaugh failed the examination. Following the examination charts and data were forwarded to quality control, who made the ultimate determination confirming that there was deception indicated on both series. The government now requests that this court find Murdaugh breached his obligations under the plea agreement, thereby relieving the government of its obligations, including the obligation to recommend a concurrent sentence. And then they have case law cited holding that government cannot unilaterally determine that a defendant has breached a plea agreement. The court has to ultimately agree. The government must be relieved of its obligations under a plea agreement only after hearing and a finding that the defendant has breached the agreement. Legal authority and argument. So then they're going through the legal authority for plea agreements. The government's allowed to make plea agreements. The government's allowed to withdraw plea agreements, but the court has to be the ultimate arbiter of that. I've been a part of these hearings when we've had defendants who have taken deals and then lied on the stand. And then we're like, so Your Honor, liar, do you agree? And the court will have all the sealed data. And then they're going through all the different language in South Carolina. And that is their full motion. The government therefore requests that the court hold Murdaugh in breach of his plea agreement and find the government's obligations null and void, relieving the government of its obligation to recommend a concurrent sentence. Footnote 5. A defendant who breaches a plea agreement cannot withdraw his guilty plea. Let us go to the docket and see if they have bumped back his sentencing date. They're going to have a hearing on this, and we're just going to pull up the docket together and see if there's anything new this morning. From yesterday, text order as to Dick Murdaugh. The government has moved to seal 3 interview reports of the defendant with the FBI and a report of the results of defendant's polygraph examination filed in conjunction with the motion to hold the defendant in breach of plea agreement. Defendant may file a response to the motion to seal before 4 p.m. on March 28th. It's so ordered. So if the defense is going to object to any of that, they have to do it by today at 4 p.m. This is from March 15th. Notice, as to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, notice is given that the court may consider at the time of sentencing an upward variance from the proposed guideline range set forth in the pre-sentencing report. This is before the government filed their motion trying to withdraw the plea deal. The court got the pre-sentencing report and notified all parties on March 15th, 11 days before the government was like, we're not adhering to our plea deal, please. The court put everyone on notice that the court intended to consider an upward variance. So whatever the pre-sentencing report said, the court intends to look at more time to take whatever the recommended range is, because the feds do all of this on a graph, and there are formulaic determinations of where you fall on the graph and what that range is. And you can either upward depart or downward depart from that. The court is saying, I know that that's what they're recommending. I think we're going to do more than that. I think we're going to go up. And that was before they knew that he lied. Notice of hearing April 1st, 10 a.m., Charleston Courtroom 1. This is the feds. This will not be videotaped. I'm sure there will be reporters in court telling us what happens. I appreciate that. This is in federal court. I can't be in South Carolina on Monday, but people will be. We'll cover it and we'll see what happens. The court can hear this hearing before the sentencing and make a determination. I will circle back and update you in the app.
Murdaugh responds. Alec Murdaugh's lawyers responded to the government arguing that their motion to withdraw the plea deal is untimely and that they are entitled to a full hearing, including confronting the polygraph examiner. They also argue that the calculations for the sentencing in the pre-sentencing report are improperly calculated and ask the court to adjust the court for a concurrent guidelines sentence. Finally, they allege that the polygraph examiner said to Murdaugh that they don't believe he murdered his wife and son, and he had recently done the polygraph on Jordan Vandersloot. They also object to the motion to seal, arguing that the redactions are enough. I have questions. Do they want the other target lawyer to be able to piece together that they are a target based on what Murdaugh said? Wow.
For deep dives into the stories that I covered here, you can find them on my YouTube channel at The Emily D. Baker and The Emily Show podcast. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday. The podcast goes live on Wednesdays. And if you want to stay in the loop with everything I'm doing, receive the fastest notifications out there, and get more Law Nerd community, join me at lawnerdapp.com, our free app for iOS and Android.